One day in an alley, when it was already dark, there were two men and a woman standing outside a house arguing with each other. The woman was telling one of the men not to bet the family's property in the gambling house, but he wouldn't listen to her. The man didn't see this girl as part of his family, so instead of listening, he hit her. This enraged man began to be calmed down by his brother, and turned to the girl and slapped her. Turning to her, he said that she was the illegitimate daughter of this family, and as soon as she got some money, she immediately wanted to take it. She must not be mistaken. Even though they share the same last name, she will never be part of their lineage. He said that the girl should just continue to serve them in everything. Taking her brother's hand in farewell, he said that if she complained to her grandfather for their behavior, she would only get worse. When they left, the girl was left alone, resentful. She remembered how she had once arrived at the palace in a golden carriage and was met by a handsome prince. When she got out of the carriage, he kissed her hand. The girl got a little embarrassed and asked him to go together to the palace sooner. She didn't want to keep people waiting. When they were already inside the castle, the prince said that no one in the entire Rembu Empire would resent her for making them wait a bit. Slowing his step, the prince asked her to enjoy this moment, for she had come a very hard way. The girl was in complete agreement with him. She had to go through a dog's life. She came from such a dolly that he probably could not even imagine to himself. But that's no excuse for being rude, the girl said firmly. As they approached the large door, the prince asked her, "Is she ready for this event?" The girl said she was ready. Then they held hands and waited for the door to open. In the meantime, the herald announced their arrival. He introduced His Highness the Crown Prince and head of the Rombardi family, Firenze Rombardi. We now move to the present time. Crowds of people stood outside the gates of the Rombardi estate. They were outraged because they had first evaded taxes by conspiring. They might be Rombardi, but they could not escape punishment for their treachery. In this crowd was Firenze. She was unhappy with her family's behavior. She had said so many times that the first prince was nothing. Rombardi. The world tree on the coat of arms. A name synonymous with eternal prosperity. The people who propelled the first emperor to the throne. Therefore, it can be said without embellishment that the history of the Rombardi is the history of the empire itself. It accumulated immense wealth through the influence of war, art and culture. Rombardi all over the world have left their mark. The imperial family, who felt threatened by them, ordered a restriction on the powers of the family after Rolak Rombardi took over. However, Rolak immediately invented the grant system and, without separating aristocrats and commoners, nurtured excellent specialists. And these same specialists then touched the fields of activity, taking up high positions as well. Eventually, the previous emperor himself cancelled the order he had given. But now, this family had almost no influence left. How could such a family be dried up in just 2 years? Firenze wondered. The reason for her anger was simple. She too had been a Rombardi for a time. A little girl who lived in South Korea and died in a car accident. That was her, and because of it, when she first opened her eyes in the body of a baby, she let out a delighted scream of joy that she had been born into a wealthy family. Except she was wrong. Her father, Gallagher Rombardi, was the third son of the previous head of the family, but her mother, who had passed away in nature, was a commoner. She was not recognized as an official bride. Still, she received her father's love, and the surname Rombardi by permission of her grandfather. However, she remained an illegitimate child and could not hope for anything more. After her father passed away a few days before her 11th birthday, she was gradually forgotten about as there was no one else to take care of her. but she couldn't stay away forever. So when she was already 15, she started working for the family herself. Her perseverance became her engine. Fortunately, her skills weren't too bad either. And so slowly, she gained more and more importance in the estate. From the age of 18, she was already managing the Rombardi household. At 19, she had helped her grandfather with his duties when he fell ill. Her father's insolent and incompetent brothers, cousins, who were the usual trash. They prevented Firenze from enjoying any of the privileges she deserved. It was very hard for her to get along with these two. One day, as Firenze sat beside in the bed of her sick grandfather, he turned to her. If he had known a little earlier that he had such a skillful heiress, he would have bequeathed the clan to her. But the girl could not imagine it. How could she, born of a commoner, leave the clan? But her grandfather said she had every right to inherit the clan. He apologized to his granddaughter, for he should have been more attentive to her when she was young. Just those words were enough to motivate her even more. She had put so much effort into the house, because she really did love Rombardi very much. However, her brother packed up her things, threw the bag at her feet, and told her to leave the estate. He said he only tolerated her because of her father, but his patience had run out. He was furious that she was a bastard daughter and thought she was a damn fool. The girl really wanted to stay here, so she bowed to him and begged him to stay Rombardi. She was willing to work for the family. But no one listened to her. She was kicked off the estate. She wasn't even allowed to exercise her inheritance rights as a Rombardi. And in exactly 2 years, they had destroyed all the Rombardi authority. The girl sat at the bar and judged her actions. She needed to support the other prince. It only takes 2 eyes to realize such trivial things. The second prince was 100 times more suitable for the role of emperor than the first prince, who only spent his time gambling and loved games. The second prince fears Brevasho Durali. A genius who was despised because he was born a maid, but once he entered the academy, he immediately asserted himself as an outstanding individual. He was the top student in both the humanities and military disciplines of the Imperial Academy. His political power was unrivaled. The parliament of aristocrats who were followers of the empress fully supported him. After drinking the last glass, she needed to go home already. There was no way she could be relieved that the Rombardi had followed the first prince and descended to dirty plots against the second prince. Now that the second prince had been granted the title of crown prince and the emperor had fallen into a coma, they felt the full measure of payback for their atrocities. When the girl left the bar, she was quite drunk. She walked in her musings, without noticing anyone around her. Because she was foaming, she could not stand steadily on her feet, so she almost fell. And when she got up, she saw a huge horse running at her. It crashed into the girl, and it looked like that was the end. In her previous life, she died in an accident. In this one, she was run over by the crew. It was a bit much. But as frustrating as it was. In that moment, she felt the life leaving her, her consciousness already drifting away. Upon waking up, the girl saw her father laboring in the library. She immediately jumped up and tried to understand what had happened. She remembered that she had been hit by a carriage. So why was she suddenly in the library? The chair seemed too high to her, and she felt very different. The girl thought it was a memory from her life, but everything seemed very natural. She didn't understand anything at all. There was only one thought in her mind at that moment. She asked her father to go to her room for a while. Running into the living room, the girl looked at herself in the mirror. She saw that she was small again. She also really didn't like the fact that her body was very weak. She had barely run a couple of meters, but she was already panting. After calming down a bit, the girl wanted to know how old she was now. She remembered that when she was 8 years old, she had fallen and would have a scar. Lifting up her dress and looking at her leg, she noticed that there was no scar. So she realized that she was not yet 8. She realized that she had been reborn for the second time. Looking out the window, she saw trees. All those trees had been cut down when Vedes took over the clan. The saplings of these trees were sent by the first emperor in honor of the completion of the Rombardi estate. Vedes, the eldest son of the family, cut them all down. The younger uncle, Lorgens, was groveling before Vedes, so he didn't object. The girl felt sad, for she knew that her father would die in a few years. He was young and in poor health, but he was so smart that everyone at the academy envied him. But suddenly she remembered that a cure for his illness was invented a few years later. And she thought she could save her father. She repeated it several times, she could save her father. It sounded like something impossible, but she had gone back in time. And she had all the knowledge she needed. In that case, she decided to protect her father, like the whole mouth of the Rombardi. First, she needed to stop Vedes from becoming the head of the family. Vedes' wife, Cyril, and the first prince's mother, Empress Lavinia Anginas, are cousins. That's why Vedes supported the first prince, taking away his shrewdness with which he could realize that the first prince was not fit to be crown prince. She needed to choose someone who would support the second prince. She remembered the words of her grandfather, who had already realized at his death that this girl was very smart. She didn't want to make a mistake with choosing a side. She knew that the second prince would still become the crown prince, so she decided to be proactive and contact him beforehand. If she could find a use for everything she knew 20 years in advance, she should be able to do well. The girl came back to the library and asked where Mr. Gallagher was now. The librarian replied that he had gone to the office of the head of the family. The girl knew the librarian Broschel very well. In her past life, she had started working in the library after Broschel retired due to illness. She had even heard that he was originally a famous professor in the academy. Turning to him, she asked, "Borrow one book." She asked for a book titled Lady of the South. After picking up the book, Firenze walked contentedly towards her grandfather's office. She decided to wait for him by the door, so she sat on the windowsill and wanted to start reading the book. It was the book she most wanted to read after being kicked out of the family. She was very sad, knowing that all this time this book had been in the book depository of the kin. Now she wanted to read this book from beginning to end. But suddenly her brothers, who had come to interfere with her, found themselves in front of her. Because the eldest grandson was a Rombardi, he was forever having new passions. The vile libertine Velisac. And Esteliu, who only blew the family's money in gambling as if it belonged to him alone. Seeing them, the girl laughed involuntarily. She had forgotten that they might have been angry about it. And then she heard the hurtful nickname her cousins called her because her mother was a commoner. They called her inferior. Yeah, around this time she was scared as hell of those boys. Their bullying was too cruel and frequent for a small child to endure. When her father resented it, Vedes and Lorias only shamed him, saying he was taking the children's pranks too seriously. The girl stayed on the windowsill and asked the boys, "How old is she now?" One of them said she was now 7 years old. After recognizing her age, she quickly counted how old her cousins were. She said that they are so big now and they are still acting uncultured. You can't bully your cousin and call her inferior, she tried to explain to them. But they wouldn't even listen to her. Instead, the boy jumped on Firenze and hit her. But instead of starting to cry, the girl stood up and hit the boy back. She was angry that they were calling the girl inferior. She attacked one of them and wanted to teach the little rascal a lesson, so that no one would ever call her inferior again. They were not used to getting back at each other, so they started crying loudly. This noise was heard by the adults who were in the next room. They opened the doors and saw Firenze fighting with one of the boys. The parents immediately ran up to their children, asking them if they were okay. They started to calm their children down, but one of the boys started screaming even louder, as if something was broken. His father immediately went to the girl to apologize to his son, but she, feeling righteous, didn't want to do it for anything. So he wanted to pounce on her, but the grandfather stopped them. He ordered everyone to calm down. He asked one of the boys to tell what happened to them. You know that if he tells the truth, their parents scold them, so the boy started lying. He said that they were just walking quietly with his brother, and suddenly this girl jumped on them. First she kicked him with her foot, and then she started hitting him with a book, which of course was not true. After listening to what Astelio had said, the king looked at the girl in silence and then turned to the boys again. He asked them, did Firenze just start beating him and Belissac for no reason? Another boy added that she hated them. But the king didn't appreciate such an act and looked menacingly at his grandson. He told him to stay out of other people's conversations. Does he not know such manners? The boy started crying again out of confusion. Then the king turned to the girl and asked her to tell her about the situation. If it had been the former her, she would have avoided the look. To me, a mating child, a crybaby with a huge amount of fears. That's what she was. But it's different now. Without an ounce of fear, the girl said she was not guilty of anything. Deeds was very angry with the girl for such behavior. How dare she say that when she had brought his son to such a state? Deeds said to her. But he was called out by the king. Just now Belissac had made the same mistake before his eyes, but his father still didn't realize it. The girl continued her story. She was only waiting for her daddy by the door. But suddenly Belissac and Astelio came and started laughing at her, calling her inferior. She asked them not to do that, and they hit her for it. Then the grandfather asked who hit her. The girl answered firmly that it was a Belissac who hit her, and added that he called her a lowly creature. He told her to go to the slums of the commoners. The girl knew her father hated being in this situation, but now she had to reveal how she was being treated on the estate. And how bad these guys have been since she was a child. Did she really raise her hand to Belissac for talking to her like that? Asked the king to the girl. But it wasn't so. She hit her cousin because he told her she wasn't a Rombardi. Even though her mother couldn't get permission to take the name Rombardi. The girl didn't dare deny it. Well, even though she may be inferior, she's definitely a Rombardi. In her past life, actually ruling the clan, she painfully realized that the fact of her existence did not mean that she was inferior. She's 100 times more suited to that surname than the idiot who only boasted of wearing it. She realized that she was no less a Rombardi than anyone else. She didn't hit him because he called her a bitch. But because he said she wasn't a Rombardi? Re-questioned her grandfather. Yes. The girl said firmly. And because he thereby denied that she was his majestic granddaughter. While they were talking, the grandfather noticed that her knees were shattered, but still she did not cry. The girl said she would cry. After she had told everything she wanted to tell, she would go to her room and cry. The king laughed out loud at this statement of the girl. The girl's father apologized for her behavior. He wanted to take care of her wounds as early as possible. After this request, the king let the two of them go. But the girl remembered that she forgot her book, so she quickly ran to get it and wanted to go. She apologized to Grandpa Zato for treating her badly. And just as Firenze and her father were about to leave, they were stopped by Viejo. He turned to the king. Would he turn a blind eye to this? Firenze has done this to a Belissac, the eldest grandson of the family. She must be punished for her crime. At such a statement from his son, the king looked at him menacingly and asked, "Does he really want to challenge his decision?" Deeds immediately apologized for his behavior. When the king went to his room, he wanted to show something to his brother, but he repeated that it was his majesty's will. Also, the brother said lastly, "Don't they take children's pranks too seriously?" These words brought them to a standstill. When Firenze and her father came to the room, the doctor was already waiting for them, and he immediately began to treat the wound. He said that such an injury might even leave a scar. His father was very concerned about this news, but not Firenze. If things had gone as in her past life, she would have gotten a scar on that spot when she was 8 years old. After treating her wound on her leg, the doctor asked, "Does anything else hurt her?" The girl showed her arm, which was a little swollen. When Veeds pushed her, she fell wrongly to the floor. A big adult pushing a small child with all his might. What can you take from a low and petty person? Judging from the degree of swelling, it's not broken, but it's better to be careful for a while. The doctor gave them a special ointment to heal the wound faster. Firenze's father thanked the doctor and asked him to step out so he could talk to his daughter alone. When the doctor came out, he turned to Tia. Why didn't she tell her daddy right away that they were torturing her? The girl replied that the boys said they would beat her more often if she told. He was very angry with them, but the girl calmed him down. She had beaten him badly today, so he wouldn't say that again. She had put up with it until now, but she wouldn't anymore. We'll beat them back. And if they don't realize it, she'll run crying to the adults. So her father may not worry. He hugged his daughter and said she did the right thing. By the way, why did she suddenly start calling him father? Let her call him daddy, like always. The father asked his daughter. The girl said that they were sure to live happily ever after together. Her father could hardly understand the meaning of her words. He never will. This time he won't die so ridiculously. The girl decided. The next day Tia sat in her new dress, with a book in her hands. She was thinking how she could get her grandfather's recognition. No matter how pathetic a fool he was, Veeds was the eldest son of the head of the family. For that reason alone, both inside and outside the house, a lot of people practically already perceive him as the head. Besides, Laurels is on the same page with him. Her father only needs books to be happy. In the meantime, it is necessary to conquer the 3 peaks of the sometimes non-existent third son. Add to all this the fact that she's still very young. In his past life, grandfather could not entrust the duties of the head of the family to any of his children. He sank everything on himself to the last, which is why he went blind. She needs to demonstrate her skills to her grandfather as soon as possible so that it doesn't happen again. But she's a bastard child, also a girl. Those weaknesses aren't going anywhere, even after she becomes the successor. They will definitely bind her at times, but that can be easily compensated for by the crown prince's patronage. Therefore, even if not for the sake of saving the clan, she must definitely attract the attention of the second prince. Preferably to help him build up his influence and gain the trust of those around him, so that he can gain the title of crown prince even easier than he once did. If she succeeded, the future emperor would not turn his back on the house of Rombardi that had long helped him. As she pondered this, she remembered that around this time, the second prince's mother should pass away. It was said that she had passed away on one of the days of this year's rainy season. And even the doctor couldn't be called because of the empress. However, she also heard that the second prince had put the empress through the same thing when he became crown prince. She couldn't even recognize the name of her illness in a thick way. Based on that, the prince's temperament was also unconventional. But in any case, right now, that boy should be alone 24 hours a day. If it were her will, she would go to him now, but for young Rombardi children, travel from the estate is restricted until their 11th birthday. But that doesn't mean it's totally impossible. The only exception to the rule is the permission of the head of the clan. Therefore, she must increase her authority in the estate and go to him at once. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door and asked for Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Gallagher immediately opened the door and looked out from behind the door. It was Mr. Claravan. He had come to them on His Majesty's errand. The girl's father thought that his father had asked for an urgent message, but that was not the case. Claravan Fillet, grandfather's right-hand man, soon to be keeping track of the Rombardi trade groups. He said he's come to see Mrs. Firenze. It turns out that after the fight, the king called Claravan to him. He told him that Firenze had taken a book by people from the south to read. And the king wondered what he thought about it. Claravan said that he read it as a misunderstanding. And what confuses him? Asked the king. The aide said that the book Men of the South is a specialized manual for accurate research. It's not the kind of book Mrs. Firenze would read. She's not even 10 years old. She probably just liked the cover. The cover is a deep green color. There's a good chance she accidentally mistook it for a storybook. It's like that with a normal child, said the king. Does he mean to say that Firenze is an unusual child? Claravan asked him. The king replied that he called his assistant to check it personally. Henceforth Firenze will also be educated like other children, the king ordered. But the aide was a little confused by the king's order. He reiterated that Firenze was very young. It's hard for children her age to even just sit still for long. To which the king just smiled and repeated, it's like that with normal children. It seems he wanted to hint something to his aide. So he asked the king what he wanted to tell him. The king told him that Firenze's mother was a nomad. She was incredibly beautiful, but that was the only thing she stood out for. Because of that, he didn't care much for her daughter, but today it seemed to him that it was she who could properly inherit the blood of a Rolac. Now we come back to this moment when Claravan entered Firenze's room. He said hello to the little mistress, and introduced himself that his name was Claravan Fillet. He is not the most competent, but is the instructor of the young gentleman of the Rombardi. He wanted to administer a sort of exam, to find out the exact level of her knowledge. If the results don't meet expectations, she won't be able to force him to let her into the class even through an order. The girl bowed and said hello to the teacher. The teacher was very delighted with her curtsy, it was perfect. The girl asked, was she really good at it? She just tried to do it by the book. Rombardi lessons. Sounds like a simple homeschooling system. It's actually the first step in cold-blooded assessment. First of all, regardless of age, only children who are ready for lessons are eligible to participate. Because of this, depending on the age of readiness for these lessons, the level of the children is determined. Plus, the age to complete the lessons is also undetermined. Notification that one can no longer attend lessons sometimes meant taking away that right. Last, the grade received at each lesson is also reported to the head of the clan. The head of the clan is the best of the best, scrutinizing everything the children say and do. However, in her past life, she was only able to attend these lessons when she was 9 years old. If the girl didn't mind, the Claravan wanted to ask her a few questions. She should answer them calmly and judiciously. He had heard that the book she was holding in her hands was a book she had personally borrowed from the library. The girl replied that she had been reading the book since yesterday. Claravan asked her what the book was about. The girl happily answered that she had not read it much yet, but it says that in the forest in the south of the empire there live amazing people. And this book is about them. After listening to her, Claravan asked who wrote this book. The girl answered that on the cover it says Rofalai. Claravan continued to ask questions and asked what was the first chapter about. The girl said that a man named Rofali told about how rumors of people from the south had reached him. She saw the teacher's face as she told it. He must think she was carrying that book around like a toy. She realized that there was a lot in this book that was boring even for the average adult. The girl thought that the man had come to her because he wanted to read this book, so she held it out to Claravan. She was curious what would happen next, but she could read it later. Seeing her answer, he couldn't believe that this girl was actually curious about something written. So he decided to ask her a trick question. He said that there were 3 rumors in this book that Rofali heard. But the girl immediately corrected him. Rofali is not he, but she. It was written in the preface. The full name was Avain Rofali. The woman is a scholar. The teacher, to verify this information, borrowed the book from the girl. He thought that such a famous research book was published by a man. After reading the preface, he found out that the girl wasn't lying to him. Given that a young child cannot understand specialized literature, he fell prey to prejudice. He had no more questions for the girl. He said she could attend classes starting next Saturday. But at first it would be difficult to keep up with the knowledge because she would be joining an already active group. The girl was very excited, she wanted to learn something new. And it seemed that the lessons would be very interesting. Her father was very happy about his daughter's achievement. He began to hug his daughter and praise her. Meanwhile, Claravan left the room so as not to disturb them. As he walked down the corridor, he pondered. Instead of being in charge of training is not a bright prospect, he was just about to give up the position. But it looked like he would have to stick around for a while. Teaching this child would be his pleasure. The next day, the girl's father collected a basket of sweets and invited her to go on a picnic with him. He noticed that it had been a long time since they had gone on a picnic together. And today was just the right weather for it. He took many of her favorite cakes and cookies. He also wanted to read under the sun together. And if they were to go for a walk together, they could stop by Dr. O'Malley's for a while. Thanking him for fixing Tia's wound. The girl realized that he had arranged the picnic because he was afraid that the girl would not want to go to the doctor. That act and seemed very nice. So she could not refuse her father in any way. After some time they went to the doctor. Tia saw a girl near the doctor and recognized her. The doctor introduced her. This is his apprentice Estera. Tia immediately got off her father's arms and ran to the girl. She told her father that she wanted this girl to treat her. Apparently, Estera had a deep affection for the mistress. Smiling said the doctor, this girl is a very capable girl, so Mr. Gallagher may not worry. The doctor will be helping her too. This girl is a specialist who will help create a very important medicine. As she was examining the lady's wound, her hands were shaking, she seemed nervous. To encourage her, Firenze said the girl had a very beautiful name. The mistress introduced herself as Firenze and her father, Mr. Gallagher. She then asked what she was studying with the doctor. Esther replied that she was studying medical botany. The little girl really enjoyed talking to the doctor's student. So she promised that she would come to see her again. When she finished her examination, she said that the swelling was almost gone, so she could change the medicine. The teacher told her to bring an extract of the herb sakos. When the girl brought the potion, Tia was very frightened. Her dad saw that she was nervous and offered her her favorite chocolate chip cookie after she drank it. To avoid upsetting her daddy, the girl closed her eyes and drank the medicine. After she drank it, she handed the cookie to the doctor and his assistant for curing her. O'Malley and Esther thanked the girl, then they went to the picnic together. On the way, the girl remembered that just at that time a rather vivid flashback had occurred in the castle. Meanwhile, the Claravan and the head of the family were sitting in the same room drinking tea. The head asked the teacher, "How did his granddaughter do?" Claravan replied that he now understood what he meant by their last conversation. The grandfather was a little saddened by this response. Before and now, his evaluation is so stingy. But the teacher replied that he had something to say this time. Honestly speaking, after the exam was over, he probed the servants in Gallagher-san's entourage a bit, but no one noticed Madame's geniality. When he claimed that he had concealed Madame's right to participate in the class, Gallagher-san's reaction started with a completely unexpected shock. He speculated that mistress might have been hiding her ability all this time. Grandfather was very sorry. It was clear to anyone that the Gallagher lacked both influence and ability. Was the environment so bad that the little girl had to hide her skills? But he still had time to ponder. He had nowhere to rush. So he asked Claravan to report back, after some time, on the outcome of this girl's lessons. Suddenly, his son came into the room. He announced that people from the Duroc trade group had arrived at the estate. From their stories, the head of the clan has learned that they intend to sell textiles in the capital, the turnover of which is only in the eastern district. At present, the Duroc trade group cannot fully take over such trading activities, so they are asking the Rombardi to arrange transportation. Claravan clarified, "Are they going to borrow the payment for these textiles from the Rombardi bank?" Anginas replied that he would like to ask them for the amount with a reserve, and warned them not to worry about repaying the debt. He swore in the name of his people that he would not betray their trust. Claravan was very unhappy about all this. Even if it is the Empress family, there must be a limit to insolence. Who would dare shake down a debtor when he comes from an imperial family? In other words, the Rombardi will be responsible for the money and hassle, and they will only reap the rewards. Then if the venture fails, the consequences will be borne entirely by the Rombardi. The master cannot accept so terrible an offer. Claravan thought. A little thought the head of the family has entrusted this case to Firenze. He must do his best to succeed. His son was very happy about this course of events. He invited Mr. Croydon to his reception room to discuss the details. But they were called away by the Claravan. He suggested they see the goods first and then discuss the deal. Everything necessary is done in sequence. You can't negotiate anything without knowing the goods you're dealing with. Well, I didn't pay much attention to those words. Quite the opposite. He didn't want anyone but him to get involved. He thought the venture would be a success, and Anginas' mouth would owe him. He didn't care how much money this endeavor would bring in. Money always comes with power. This debt will be his gold mine. He will be on par with the imperial family. Heeding the advice of his aide, the clan leader asked the Croydner, "Can the goods be inspected?" He said that he had just prepared a few pieces and left some textiles in the capital warehouse. He would bring them here another day. Answered the Croydner. Claraval was very angry with Viejo. How much longer would he lick the boots of the man who had come to borrow money and resources from him? Left alone in the room with the head, Claraval said that this didn't even come close to a deal. He asked the head to reconsider his decision. To which he replied, if Jean-Annette had suggested it, what would he have done? The aide angrily replied that Jean-Annette would never have offered her such a stupid proposal. That's true, the head agreed, but he should think carefully. Is the game not really worth the candle? One child is perpetually overreacting, another doesn't care at all, and the third is too weak-willed to do anything about it. Of all of them, Jean-Annette is the best candidate, but he didn't trust her spouse. Jean-Annette is doing well, so he only kept an eye on her. This is the basic principle: the head of the clan doesn't interfere in the battle of the heirs. This allows for the greatest objectivity. And since that's the case, he should at least support the offspring who is at least trying to do something, shouldn't he? And then the head decided to conduct another test. This time for Angina's and Viezza. Well, didn't he just a short time ago have high hopes for Mrs. Firenze? Claravan asked him. She is certainly intelligent, but they still know too little about her innate abilities. Also, she is extremely young. For now, all they have to do is observe. This child's probation has barely begun. In the meantime, the girl arrived at the classroom where the class was to be held. When she opened the doors, she saw Belisac there, Mayron with Kiliu and Larn. As soon as he saw her, Belisac got up and started talking rudely to the girl. She calmly Mama said that from today she will study with them. Belisac thought that the girl was lying, after she said that she was allowed by her grandfather. The girl decided not to waste time and nerves on a small child, and looked for a place to sit, but suddenly Mayron and Kiliu came up to her. The girl was very surprised, because in her previous life, they didn't care about her. What had gotten into them? It turned out that they were very interested to know about their fight with Belisac. At that time, a Claravan came into the room. He saw that all the children were there, so he asked them to take their seats. The girl was lucky the class started without any problems. But why were these guys sitting on her sides? Kiliu and Mayron. Aunt Shenanatha's twins. In her previous life, those two weren't interested in her, they never even paid attention to her. No, they didn't. When she was beaten up by Belisac and Astaliu, they didn't even cast a glance at her, completely ignoring her and looking the other way. Yes, that's definitely what happened. But why weren't they suddenly acting like that? The girl felt wildly uncomfortable. Today, they would have to study the basic concept of business. When it comes to defining a business, the very first treatise book. The teacher was telling them. Well, the lessons weren't much different from her expectations. For example, Belisac. Every time he acted ignorant, she thought he was listening in the wrong place in his Rombardi lessons, but she didn't expect it to be so true. Except it's weird that the teacher can definitely hear everything perfectly. Why isn't he punishing him? Why doesn't he even try to wake him up? He doesn't give punishment, he doesn't try to keep discipline, and he doesn't try to interest him in anything. But after the lesson, he'll report everything to the head of the family. Well, if that's the case, she had to prove herself. Now it's time for the lesson to end. He told the children that today he would give them a special homework assignment. It's due next week morning. The topic is a log. He pointed to the log standing right in front of him. It is sturdy and will sprout quickly. This tree of life is light and widespread on the continent. Their job was to sell this log and get paid for it. They could sell it any way they wanted. They could chop it or stab it. They could burn it if they had to. The only thing forbidden was to use their status to force a purchase. The condition is to sell the tree only to the person who needs it. But it was Belisac who voiced his displeasure. Why should he do something like this? A job in which you personally touch money is vulgar. Some selling of a thing can be delegated to those below him. Dependence on money is not honorable for aristocrats. But such a model is yesterday. Today, even if you're an aristocrat, you can't get anywhere without money. Moreover, didn't even these same Anginas create the Duroc trading group? But Belisac and his mother still say such utopian things. In that case, the teacher had no choice but to give him a satisfactory grade on the assignment. The boy was very frightened when he heard his teacher say that. But he had no other choice. The current assignment was to sell the item and get paid. The boy said he wouldn't do it, so his grade was not satisfactory. Then the boy wanted the teacher to change the assignment. Because he thought the assignment was ridiculous. But the teacher stopped listening to him and turned to the other students. Whoever can get the money for selling the tree and earns the highest amount will get a separate reward from him. They must try their best to fulfill this task. It sounds simple, but when you think about it, it's not that easy. The log itself won't fetch more than a couple of pennies. Therefore, you have to make something out of it to raise its value. Something that can be wooden, something that will be in demand. From crude utensils and toy furniture to a carved frame. At the same time, there does not have to be a lot of effort put into it. The wood of life is used a lot, but it is not expensive and not rare material. Yes, and the girl did not really understand much about woodworking. And if you use someone else's help, you'll have to pay the helper. If all goes wrong, the cost of goods will be higher than their selling price. So not only would she not make any money, but she would suffer a loss. Tia thanked the teacher for today's lesson. She would do her best on her homework. As she left, the teacher noticed that the girl's eyes were glowing. Judging by her enthusiasm, she had already found the solution. This made him look forward to the next lesson. After the lesson, the girl ran to her father. He immediately began to ask his daughter, how was the lesson? Did she listen attentively to the teacher? The girl said it was very interesting. Tia just ran into the classroom towards the end. She asked him if he was busy now. But Mr. Gallagher was not busy. If she needed something, it was no more important than all his business. Daddy answered her. Now she admitted that she had a request. She asked her father to draw her something. Her father assumed it was either a flower or a tree or a cute animal. But the girl asked to draw her grandmother. They have portraits of her all over the house. But on these portraits and clothes too luxurious, and the face of the grandmother too strict. And the girl needed to see her peacefully smiling grandmother. She wanted to see her as her father remembered her. The last time he had seen her was a long time ago, so he didn't remember her well. But she was a very sensitive person. The father gave his daughter his drawing. After taking the drawing, the girl said she would go and play outside for a while. And so the girl ran outside and ran into the village. Behind the Rombardi estate is a village where the hired masters live. Unlike the servants who live permanently on the estate and are given rooms. They live further away and are in charge of making customized items for the Rombardi. Simply put, it is a village created by the Rombardi for their craftsmen and their families. So where could she possibly need a human? Would she really have to ask every person she met? But before looking for someone, she decided to wash her hands, because on the way here she fell and got dirty. It didn't take long for the girl to find the well, but when she bent down, she realized that she couldn't draw water herself. She still wanted to try to draw water, but a boy came up to her and caught her, because she would have fallen into the well. Didn't her parents teach her not to play near the well? The boy asked her. Seeing the boy's face, Tia recognized him. Alfio Jean. A genius sculptor whose talent was recognized quite late, at the age of 30. He was extremely grateful to the Rombardi who, albeit belatedly, recognized him, a simple carpenter. And, as a sculptor, he dedicated his first creation to their family. Using a workshop of dozens of trees, he created a masterpiece of masterpieces, the embodiment of the emblem of the world tree, the symbol of the Rombardi. With this one piece, he became instantly famous throughout the empire. The girl introduced herself to him and said her name was Firenze. When he recognized her, he began to apologize for bothering her and telling her what to do. But the girl was not angry with him. It really was her mistake. More importantly, is he really good at making sculptures? The girl asked him. But the boy said he only carves toys out of wood and sells them. To which the girl said that if he is paid for his work, then he is already a master. So she had a request for him. She asked him to make a bust of him from a picture. The boy replied that he still has a hard time with people's faces. Although, of course, he had once made busts of members of his family. The teacher gave them a little over a week. If he couldn't do it in that time, she would have to come up with something else. The boy said that tomorrow was his day off, so he should be able to do it in 4 days. So that he wouldn't have time to refuse, the girl decided to give him the drawing and leave. She was counting on him. She said she would pay him well for his labor. Since he'd worked hard to hone his skills, any labor must be paid for. She is a Rombardi. And the Rombardi are proud to follow the principles of fair dealing. Also, he needed to get the log he would use from her room. Because it's too heavy for the girl and she can't carry it to him. So when she was already in her room, the twin brothers came in. They called the girl to play, but she said she was too busy to play with them now. The boys said that she was not busy at all, she was just reading books all day long. To which the girl replied that if they continued to behave like that, she would never play with them. So she promised them that she would play with them. After that, the boys left her room. And left sitting on the bed the girl thought. They pester her when she eats, pounce on her with requests to play anytime and anywhere, and so on. Why do they come to her so often? In a previous life and I just didn't care. After Auntie Shannonette's divorce, they stayed father, and once they rebuilt the castle of Schulz, they acted as if they had nothing to do with the Rombardi. By the way, Aunt Shannonette. Why did she divorce Bastien Schulz in the first place? He was madly in love with his aunt. He even gave up his castle for her. Suddenly her father came running into her room. He showed her the book he had finally finished. The girl was very curious about what her father had written, so she asked to see it. Her dad had previously written dozens of books. He had dropped out of the academy and hadn't really practiced academia. And in the end, it was all limited to writing 1 volume at a time, which then went to dust in the bookcases of the estate, but he always looks happy, no matter what the end result is. What did he write about? He was looking forward to the day he would choose a dress for the debutante ball for Tia, his much-loved daughter. He wanted to finish this book by the time she started wearing adult dresses. This book didn't shine with the depth of the text, but with it she would be able to learn what styles had been popular in the Rembo Empire for generations. Fashion tends to make a comeback. Usually the dresses for the debutante ball are handled by the mother, but her mother had died, so it was her father who handled it. After reading that, the girl cried. Then she couldn't get into the debutante ball. After her father died, she ceased to exist for everyone. No one even thought of sending her an invitation. And she herself was completely focused on her duties, she was not to debut in society. When she was able to achieve some position of sorts, the places associated with her father had long since been rearranged. And she had none of his books left on her hands. Perhaps in a past life he had written her one. Dreaming of the day he would personally pick out her dress. Tia longed that in this life, her father would see her debutante. Firenze really wanted her, in the dress he had chosen, to take his hand and walk into the ballroom. While they were sitting in the room, the girl saw through the window a carriage entering their estate. And asked her father to walk with her in the garden right away. She seemed to be up to something again, to help her father. It turns out that it was Mr. Croydon who had come to show the fabric they would be selling together. Claravan inquired. Of what material is the cloth made? Mr. Croydon replied that they make the cloth from the long stalks of Croy. This raw material is traditionally used in the eastern regions of the empire. The head of the trade group personally scouted everything about it, Veeds told him. He began to shame Claravan into not pretending to be an expert in everything, since they don't really know anything. His ignorance is natural, said Croydon. Although it is a traditional raw material, It is only used in the eastern regions. Not many people know about this material. But people love curiosities. Therefore, the outlook for this enterprise is very positive. But the head of the Rombardi family thought otherwise. A foolish trade group, unsuitable for trading things. This enterprise is only aimed at bribing the empress. An amateurish approach, but it's enough for the empress. Diego trembles with anticipation. He truly believes that regardless of the degree of success, this will help him get closer to the empress, except that if he fails, he will not only suffer losses, but also incur wrath. Suddenly, Firenze came running towards them. She jumped on the wagon and looked at the cloth. Deeds told her to go play somewhere else. Because they work here. She ran up to her grandfather and hugged him. Tia said she heard his voice. The girl said she and her daddy went out for a walk. And she heard the teacher's voice. Then the girl asked her grandfather, "What was that cloth?" Taking her in his arms, and the grandfather told her that it was a material made from a grass called croy. Now they were pondering whether they could make money by selling this cloth. The girl immediately realized that this enterprise, a complete failure. They don't even know anything about the features and benefits of the fabric. In the end, they will be forced to give up everything. It was as if they had nothing else to spend money on. It took a long time for Rombardi to make up for the losses she had suffered and to be ridiculed by the merchants for a while. However, she knew that since she was a child no one would listen to her, even if she told them about all the problematic aspects of the case. So it was up to her father to play the part. He approached the wagon and asked Tia to leave so that she would not disturb the adults. But the girl was not going to leave so easily. She told her father that this cloth was made from a herb called croy. That got him a little interested. He was very curious to see what he had only read about in books before. Hearing that his son knew something about this cloth, his father asked him to tell him about it. Gallagher said that did he know that croy has been used in certain regions of the empire for about 100 years. It is easy to produce cloth from this material, and it is very abundant, so commoners are happy to purchase such cloth. After saying that, Mr. Croatan pounced on Gallagher. Is this really the kind of cloth used by commoners? That this cloth is coarse and globular, so it's not suitable for noblemen's outfits. Mr. Croatan did not believe it. The man who had told him about this material said that clothes made of it were happily worn by nobles and commoners alike. Grandfather reminded Mr. Croatan that he had said that he had personally learned about this fabric. To which he replied that it had been handled by a very close acquaintance of his, whom he trusted as himself. It seems that this acquaintance deceived him. In fact, this fabric has another disadvantage, added Gallagher. Since the material is of vegetable origin, the fabric has a kind of shelf life. He knew that because the material is based on plant stems, it is very sensitive to moisture. It had recently been the rainy season, so the fabric had deteriorated. Mr. Croatan was very saddened to hear this information. They could imagine how hurt he was. He has no alternatives, only chrome cloth. Noi is a common herb, so it can be found in the nearby territories as well. There is no problem with obtaining the materials. Perhaps if he hopes to make aristocrats his main customers, he should try adding flannel when creating the cloth. Honestly, chroma and the material is pretty good. It's lightweight and breathable. That's a very big plus. And if you dilute it with flannel, you can significantly reduce the cost of goods. Spending a little extra money on it, you can save a lot later on the main material, at the same time making the finished product softer and fresher. But to work with flannel, you need skilled craftsmen, said Claravan. We'll have to look for weavers with the right skills. In Rombardi, as I just have a guild of weavers, there are plenty of masters. However, in such a case, when adding new cloth, the division of profits will have to be re-evaluated based on how much each party contributes to production. Gallagher wanted to leave with his daughter, so as not to disturb the adults. But his father called out to him. He said he was entrusting the venture to him. He felt that the head of the trade group needed someone knowledgeable in the field. Mr. Croydon agreed with what he said. It would be good for him to have someone who knows the business. He wanted to give up the position, but the girl insisted, and he agreed to help them in this venture. All of his father's knowledge would help neutralize the defects in the fabric. The Angina's clan will cooperate with the Rombardi clan. Everyone wants in just because of the eldest son's position. At that time, it's as if Lorges doesn't exist for them. Therefore, Deed still attended all receptions at the imperial palace on behalf of the Rombardi. But the Rombardi heir is always elected in a fair contest. If this venture becomes very successful, the invitation from the imperial family next time will come in the name of Gallagher. And in the imperial palace, there was someone she really needed to meet soon. The second prince. Ferraz Brevachot Durali.